Well, good evening, everybody, and a special good evening to family, friends, colleagues, and past and current students and their families from across the globe. And I wish to offer a very special welcome as well to our academic guests, Professor Margaret Barrett from Monash University and Professor Graham Welch from the University College London. Welcome to the online book launch of Teenage Boys, Musical Identities and Music Education, an Australian narrative inquiry. And it's wonderful to have you all here. At this time, I ask that you please check that your microphone is muted, and you're very welcome to turn your camera on if you'd like. Feel free to use the chat feature, and a reminder that this session will be recorded and released online. In Australia, we begin by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first musicians, storytellers, and educators of this land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, celebrating their valuable contribution to Australian music, education, and culture. In the chat, you can also acknowledge the Indigenous people of your country if you would like. And the image that you're seeing on screen is the beautiful sunset that I took at Twig in Western Australia, and I acknowledge and pay respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. So tonight is one of the final paragraphs in a very long chapter that has taken about 12 years to unfold, and you have all starred in some way, and I'm delighted to share this work with you. We're going to begin with an overview of the book series by Professor Graham Welch, and then I'll provide an overview of this book. Next, we'll hear from some of the featured boys who are now adults, reciting some narrative excerpts, and we'll conclude with a discussion between myself, Professor Barrett, and Professor Welch about the book's contributions to the field. So this book is published in the Society for Music, Psychology and Education Research, Studies in the Psychology of Music book series by Routledge, and the series editors are Professors Graham Welch, Adam Ockleford, and Ian Cross. Professor Welch is here with us in this session and is the established Chair of Music Education at the University College London Institute of Education. And thank you, Graham, for introducing the book series to us.
Welcome again, all right, from England and from Winchelsea, which is a tiny little medieval village in the south of England, very close to the sea. So the SEMPRE series, we began this because although we had at that time 2 journals, now 3 journals, we wanted to make sure that research was actually being accessed by a much wider population, and particularly by people in what at that time we certainly considered to be underserved academic communities, such as in Latin America or in parts of the global South, for example. And so we wanted to have books that were broadly interesting, that could be useful not just to researchers but also to practitioners and policymakers. We began the series with Ashgate Press, which was then taken over by Routledge in 2009. So across the last 15 years, we now have published 48 different titles, and we have another 6 commissioned, including hopefully one by Margaret and her colleagues. The whole point of the series, as I said, is trying to make research more accessible. So taking often people's theses, but they might be edited collections, they might be new young researchers working with more experienced colleagues, in order to try to make a difference. And we're absolutely delighted to have Jason's book as part of this series. It's absolutely mainstream, the kind of things that we're trying to do. So That's my introduction.
Thank you so much, Graham. And it is a real privilege to be part of this series. It's not something that I've taken lightly at all either. And it's wonderful to make a contribution in this space and be alongside such leaders in the field as well. So thank you so much for allowing me to be involved in the series. I'm really thankful. I'm going to give an overview of the book now, and I'm going to begin with a little bit of some conceptual framing or theoretical ideas that frame this work. Music is a powerful process and resource that can shape and support who we are and wish to be. Our past, present, and projected future music values and uses can significantly contribute to our identity construction. We can use music in a range of ways to perform our inner selves, including to experiment, form, define, maintain, disrupt, and even repair who we are. Music in particular holds great significance to adolescents' identities and can support their mental health and well-being. Substantial global research attention has been dedicated to the field of musical identities in the last 2 decades. Recent scholarship considers individuals to have multiple musical identities that are enacted, embodied, dynamic, and situated. Musical identities are recognised by scholars as having 2 categories: identities in music that are cultural and occupational roles we take on, such as performer, music teacher, or informed audience member, and music and identities are the ways that music features in our lives. Musical identities also interact with other identities, such as occupational, gender, sexual, cultural, religious, and socioeconomic, and so on. Examining musical identities using the lens of other identity theories allows for a deeper understanding of musical identity construction and maintenance. The concept of identity work is a useful perspective in examining the underlying processes of identity construction, and Possible Selves provides a theory for examining the motives and goals of identities that are pursued. The use of the phrase identity work acknowledges that an individual's identity is continuously evolving, contains multiple components, and is an ongoing construction and development through self-reflection and interactions with others. An individual's values and uses of music are also recognised as important processes and motives in identity construction. Values are considered to be an individual's broad motivating goals that serve as guiding principles in their actions. Music is recognised as a participatory activity, and a range of uses and functions have been identified by scholars. Both music values and uses have been considered as important processes in shaping our identities, and this book proposes that individuals' uses of music are the enactment of their music values. A direct correlation has been identified between learning and developing music knowledge, skills, and understanding and musical identity development. School class music education has the ability to substantially shape and support an adolescent's identity work. Senior secondary class music provides a unique setting where students have demonstrated a high value and sustained commitment to music learning. A particular challenge in this context is supporting the range of student musical identities emerging. Informed by social constructivism, praxis music education, and Kodai-inspired practices, this book presents the senior secondary class music teaching and learning framework used at an Australian independent boys' school to nurture multiple musical identities. So this book is situated at Queensland Boys' School, or QBS, which is an Australian non-selective single-sex P to 12 day and boarding school where I was teaching at the time. Students were recognised or encouraged to embrace a holistic education consisting of academic, sporting, spiritual and cultural involvement. And the basis of education philosophy at the school was that a successful education teaches students how to think rather than what to think. Stories for this book were generated with 10 adolescent boys in the Year 12 music class and their parents. There were 17 students in total who studied Year 12 class music in this context. And by electing to continue studying music throughout secondary school, these students demonstrated continued dedication and interest in music learning and development. Students had studied music with me, ranging from 2.5 to 5 continuous years. And due to the context of the study, all participants were male, aged between 17 and 18 years, and identified as boys. Parents were a mix of mothers and fathers. The creative and arts-based research, design, and methods used in this book are innovative and noteworthy. This book presents a narrative inquiry case study. Narrative inquiry is a powerful arts-based approach to convey research. It is a highly appropriate approach for examining identities, the self-stories we tell ourselves and share, and the stories others tell about us. Defined simply as stories lived and told, narrative inquiry aims to present resonating stories that reveal the deep individual complexities of phenomena. Data were generated using one-on-one semi-structured interviews, incorporating a draw and tell artifact elicitation technique with Year 12 students and their parents. Parent interviews and teacher-researcher reflexivity were used to triangulate student views and offer further insight. In this study, my role was blurred and never changing, and at different times was that of the teacher, the researcher, or both. As the participants were known to each other, they also often spoke about one another, inadvertently corroborating each other's accounts. Boys, and generally their parents, were freely forthcoming with their stories, placing a great sense of trust in the teacher-researcher. Data were interpreted through the lens of narrative analysis, giving voice to adolescent boys through 6 distinctive stories, and the subsequent analysis of the narratives and remaining interview transcripts informed the discussion and overall findings of the project. So, after all this time, what was found? The question. And I've summarised this for us in 3 slides. So it's a very broad snapshot of what was found. The first is in regard to the various values and uses that adolescent boys used in their identity construction. And there were 3 pillars, you might say: individual, relationships with others, and what I proposed as proficiency in the discipline of music. In regard to individual uses, boys were using music as an autotelic experience for self-expression and self-concept, self-regulation, and also using music itself and musicians as models in their identity construction. In regard to relationships with others, these students used music to feel valued by others and to make a valuable contribution to their community and to the world. They also strongly were interested in using music and developing skills in the discipline of music. This was primarily through music learning, but also listening to diverse and new music, sound experimentation and music creation, and also musical expertise independence. They used music for the purposes of identity construction in the following ways. It was personalised, it was evolving, a process and resource for musical identities, and a process and resource for musical possible selves. In regards to personalised, there was not one student that used music in the same way. It was highly personalised and individualised. It was also evolving. What they were doing previously was different to what they were doing today and different to what they intended in the future. It was not static. The way they used music in their lives was constantly changing. It was also a process and a resource for musical identity construction. They had multiple and circumstantial. There were varying saliences. For some students, it was just a hobby. For others, it was everything to them. They also drew heavily on their prior learning and development, and the family influence was incredibly strong in this context. And lastly, it was a process and a resource for musical possible selves. And a very interesting finding that emerged was the conflict that these students had at the end of secondary school between their passion and perceived financial security into their futures. And that's something that has actually turned into its own paper by itself. One of the highlights of this book is also the construction of a teaching and learning framework that was used in this setting. And again, it can be grouped into 3 interacting pillars that are working side by side. I tried desperately to actually remove myself from this study in a way to minimize bias, but going over and over the students' stories and what parents were saying, it became overwhelmingly obvious that the student-teacher relationship was incredibly important in this context and could not be ignored. And this was through being a credible model and expert, the ability to, and the desire to ignite and share passion, and the genuine care expressed by the teacher. Another significant aspect in this context that facilitated multiple musical identities was what I've come to call musical flourishing. And underneath that were these ideas of the development of musical understanding for every student in the classroom that led to learner agency as part of an ethical music learning community. And classroom music as well didn't exist in isolation. In this context, classroom music entangled all of the musical worlds that students brought with them and were interacting in. Finally, another significant aspect of nurturing multiple musical identities in this context was diverse music and musicking. And this consisted of diverse music material, repertoire, songs, and the resources that were being used, but also entangled musicking, all the things that musicians do. And finally, connected to real life music learning. And the arrow down the bottom again highlights that all 3 of these pillars were interacting across and worked together. It was not one aspect that was nurturing an environment of multiple musical identities, but actually it was all of these things combined. So let's go through a bit of the chapter outline. And this book, Teenage Boys, Musical Identities and Music Education, an Australian Narrative Inquiry. For those wondering, it's approximately 100,000 words and contains 36 images across 252 pages. The book begins with a foreword by Professor Welch, who is the established chair of music education at the University College of London. And the prelude presents my own detailed narrative, including my music education influences and perspectives and the initial curiosities of this research. Chapter 1 introduces the research study, the contextual framework, and my underpinning research motivations. The methodology and my approach to narrative inquiry and draw and tell interviews is described, and the significance of the study outlined. There are 3 parts to the book, and part 1 sets the scene and examines the underlying conceptual framework you heard before of the study with reference to contemporary literature. Chapter 2 provides a synthesis of current theory and empirical research regarding musical identities and the identity theories of identity work and possible selves. And literature is also reviewed regarding the intersection of music education, gender, and identity. In Chapter 3, it's proposed that individuals use music to enact their values, and an overview of Australian school class music and my personal approach to music education is described in Chapter 4. Part 2, which is chapters 4 to 10, presents 6 distinctive narratives of adolescent boys at the end of their schooling experience. Readers will gain a deep insight into the musical identities of Aaron, Blake, Connor, Elijah, Michael, and Tyler, and each chapter introduces a teenage boy and stories his music values and uses, and how music and class music shape and support his identity work. Part 3 reveals the analysis, discussion, and findings of this research study, where a thematic analysis of the previous 6 narratives is further supported by examples, quotes, and drawings from Austin, Colton, Daniel, and William. Chapter 11 uncovers the values and uses of music by these adolescent boys studying senior secondary class music. How music is used to shape and support their musical identities is discussed in Chapter 12. And Chapter 13 provides a teaching and learning framework to shape and support multiple musical identities in senior secondary class music based on the findings of this study. An epilogue reconnects the reader to the boys of this study, who are now young men, and provides a snapshot of music in their lives 5 years after graduating secondary school. And a personal reflection from me concludes the investigation. And I did just want to point out as well that the prelude and the teaching and learning framework in Chapter 13 is open access, and you're very welcome to access these online on the Taylor and Francis website. So I thought it would be nice as a special feature of this particular text to showcase in this session some of the narrative excerpts from participants. These participants now have all grown up. They've moved on. They've completed their university degrees, well, nearly all of them. Some of them are on their third, I think. And they're scattered all across the world. But their lives continue to actually intersect, and music plays a role. But what will happen now is I'm going to present a drawing for a particular participant, and then very generously, the men who were boys at the time have recorded some videos of them reading their story from when they were 17 or 18 years old. So it's really quite special. We'll begin with Connor.
Connor uses music for its intrinsic value and to manage the self or achieve what he describes as freedom. In response to the question, what do you enjoy about music? He draws a cliff face overlooking a green field and ocean absent of people. Connor explains his drawing. It's just an outlook with a field overlooking the ocean, and really it's just freedom. Through writing and listening to music, it takes you away. You can forget about what you're doing, just sit and listen, and it takes to a whole new place. You can show someone a complete storm or really, really calm moment where it's just peaceful or hectic and people dying. It's just able to convey more than words without needing words. Connor speaks to the expressive potential of music. It's important to me because I really think without music, there would not be much emotion left in the world. Sure, people would have emotions, but it's through things like poetry and music. It's really how you can show it to a grand scale. Telling someone I really care about you is great, but through music, it taps at what we have underneath. It just says more. For Connor, music communicates what words cannot. Connor describes a recent experience where he used music to manage his emotions and work through a difficult time. I was going through a rough patch personally, wasn't even that long ago. I locked myself in my room. I started having music blaring. At first, it was really loud and really fast paced because I was so frustrated at the time. And shuffling my iPod, I eventually got to something a little bit calmer, and it helps relieve the pressure and just get you back on your feet. You get your feet back on the ground to say you can start again. Music is personally empowering for Connor. He says there's no other activity in his life that has had a similar effect because everything else in my life has limits. Sport, you could be a great footballer, you can play in front of thousands, but if you just want calm and peace, you can't really get that through sport. Academics, it's stressful, but it still has its boundaries again. Whereas music, you can do anything with music. Music has a deep personal meaning for Connor. He uses music to achieve freedom and to do anything. This freedom is achieved by making and listening to music. He uses it also for emotion and mood management, as he believes music is a tool for communicating meaning that goes deeper than words. Connor believes music presents him with unlimited potential for expression when compared to other pursuits such as sport and academics.
We'll go to the next story, and I should just point out before we do that Connor has actually since school completed a Bachelor of Music at 2 institutions. He went and did 2, and then he's actually now completing his Master of Teaching down in Melbourne to become a music teacher. So you can see this is someone who was really invested in music being part of their lives and their future. This is Blake, and Blake actually works and runs the family farm in Western Queensland. And if you look carefully behind his image, I think that will help support this story.
Blake's upbringing in country music in country Queensland has moulded his musical identity with the genre of country music, or my genre, as he calls it. He says, "You're influenced by the music around you and the people who like it." Blake loves the farming life and says being in the city for boarding school is just so boring. "There's nothing that really excites me here apart from sport and music, but being in the bush, you can do whatever you want. You're free to go and jump on a horse. Before I came to boarding school, we'd come home from school and hop on a horse or drive a truck or tractor and just do what a normal country kid would do." Blake feels that living outside the city granted him more freedom and life experience. Blake's identity work within the country music genre enables to connect him daily with the country lifestyle back home, despite boarding in the city. Blake has a clear vision of a future as a musician. His past and present uses of music inform his dream and shape his desired future identity. In responding to the question, "What will you do with music in your future?" Blake draws a picture of a semi-trailer with his name on the side, inspired by one of his idols. He says he wants to use my gift to live my dream. "I've always dreamed of me owning a fleet of trucks with a big Blake Campbell with my face on the side of it, the trailer cruising around. Mum's had the same vision for me. That would be the coolest thing, to have a fleet of trucks with that on the side. That's what Luke Bryan has, that carts his gear around, carts his stages around, packs out stadiums to thousands and thousands of fans who enjoy country music. I want to have that sense of accomplishment, that I know people love me for what I do. In the future, I definitely would love to be a musician. I want to sell albums. I want to make music that people like. I want my name to be out there." Blake has previously mentioned that after he graduates from school, he will pursue a diesel fitting trade. He explains how his trade and music will fit into his life. "Being a diesel fitter will take me 4 years, so I'll do music on the side. I'll keep trying to record another album, and write music. I'll definitely just write music, even if I don't record music until I'm finished my trade. But I'll try and sing at pubs and on Friday nights, and I'll do festivals. I'm going down to Tamworth Country Music Festival at the start of the year. I've been accepted into the Academy of Country Music for a week's course there with a couple of big stars. So that will be a good experience, which will get my name out there. If I have the opportunity to live this dream full time, I would do it, definitely."
So if you go 300 kilometres west of Brisbane on a Friday night, I believe you can catch Blake performing at the pub regularly in the local town that he lives and works a part of in that community. Tyler is now, has just set foot actually very recently in the UK, and he's recorded this for me from London recently.
Class music has exposed Tyler to a diverse repertoire and the value of different points of view. In responding to the question, "What do you enjoy about class music?" he draws graphic notation. That is us sitting around and you teaching us about how musicians and composers break away from conventions. The example I've used was the graphic notation. I found it interesting to listen to something that might not even be as appealing to the ears, but it's cool to see where people would try and take it and where I hadn't thought possible. A lot of people aren't interested in this, but I'm interested in the history of music. I like learning about what other people have done and why they've done it. There's one Steve Reich piece come out, similar to It's Gonna Rain. It was about injustice and racism towards black people. Tyler had enjoyed further understanding how music works and can address social justice issues. Tyler's class music exposure to diverse repertoire and ideas has led to him respecting and even wanting to learn from others' different points of view. He says the most valuable thing he has learned from class music is to keep an open mind to music, learn lots of things from lots of people and places. Even if you think it might be stupid at the time, you can see the value in it later. If you'd shown graphic notation to me in year 7, I would have been like, this is just crap. But at least I've become more open to the idea of what they're trying to do. It's in the context behind the repertoire. I think it's just the more exposed to the more things you find you like, and the more you're open to other things. Such a response highlights the potential of musicology studies in secondary school. Class music has broadened Tyler's outlook on the human experience through exposure to different musics. In asking Lawrence, Tyler's father, what he hopes Tyler has enjoyed about class music, he says, "Just that exposure to as much of music and music theory and the whole ranges of different music, whether it's classical or whether it's country or whatever it is. I think it's given him that gift. I used to send him off to guitar lessons as well at the Best Music Shop, and I say he's had that exposure, but this has taken it to a whole new level, which intellectually has stimulated him, and I think that's the difference. That's what's been really good."
And then Colton has been able to join us live this evening, and Colton will share his story now.
Hey everyone. So my story, Colton. Adolescent boys use music as a relational resource for a sense of connectedness, providing networks of mutual meaning-making and activity. For students in this study, music connected people through shared experiences, conversations, memories, interests, and passions. These connections established and developed long-lasting relationships with family members, friends, and collaborators. For example, in the case of Lawrence and Tyler, music has been a really nice way of getting to know each other. Connor and Anna have used music for shared experiences. Michael uses music as a social tool, such as a conversation icebreaker, and to establish connections with people. He said, "I'm friends with people that I probably wouldn't talk to if it weren't for music." Colton drew and spoke about the community of music. "I meet loads of like-minded people I love when doing something that I love. All the conversations and making really beautiful music that I always enjoy suits my extroverted self, and so music allows me to exploit that. I really, really enjoy that part of it." Relationships in and through music can contribute to the development of musical understanding as collaborators learn and grow from one another. For example, Elijah and Colton composing, Michael and Tyler performing, and peers as models for Blake.
Thank you so much, Colton. And Colton was reading a part of one of the findings chapters then that featured all of the collective voices together, and particularly his story and drawing on the community of music. Colton is another example of a student who has completed a Bachelor of Music with honours and is now going on to pursue a medical profession pathway. So thank you so much, Colton, for being here. It's great to have you part of this sharing session. We're now going to move on to the discussion of the contribution to the field that this book makes. And I welcome again Professor Margaret Barrett and Professor Graham Welch for this particular segment. And Professor Welch is going to lead asking the questions, and Professor Barrett and I will take turns responding. And I previously introduced Graham earlier, and I also would like to introduce Margaret, who is a leading figure in Australian and international music education. She's currently Professor and Head of the Sir Kelman Cohen School of Music and Performance at Monash University. So thank you so much, Margaret and Graham, for being here. Graham, would you like to kick it off?
Yes, I shall start by asking Margaret, what do you think the particular contribution is of this book to the field?
There are many, but the particular one is looking at voices of young men, which is an area that has been relatively neglected. And in that very process, demonstrating that music uses are extraordinarily diverse, the meanings of music are diverse. And I think there is for us as educators a singular lesson to try to avoid stereotyping any group, or indeed narrowing down our ways of teaching and content to some sort of mythical single normative group, but to instead to understand the really diverse and complex nature of music and our engagement with it.
Great. And Jason, on reflection?
I'm so pleased that you mentioned that, Margaret, because I think that is one of the significant contributions that this book demonstrates, that there's many ways to be a musical person in the world. And it's really, really important that we take a moment or more to understand those complexities and celebrate those as well. Even if they are all male, they can actually have many, many diverse ways in which they experience the world. I think the other thing for me in particular as well, as a music educator, there's at times often a lot of criticism around classroom music education. But this is one example of many that are out there where classroom music education is very meaningful and significant to participants in shaping their lives, both musically and more broadly as well. In one of the narratives of Elijah's narrative, he actually says that this particular classroom music was the only subject that taught him how to be a person.
Right. So why do you think music identities are particularly important? Why do we need to understand them?
I think for me, it's because every single person has a musical identity, and it might vary in strength between people, but the reality is we all have one. And we've seen overwhelmingly the positive things that music can do for people. Yes, it can also be a negative experience as well in particular contexts. We do acknowledge that. But overwhelmingly, music is a positive way that people can live and engage in life. And if that's the case, well, then everyone deserves that opportunity. And we know then that music education is a way that we can support and nurture and bring out people's musical potentials and help them lead musical lives. So that's why I think it's really important, and why we need to understand more about it. How can we better support our young people, particularly those who need it most?
Right. Margaret?
Well, I think it illustrates that identity construction, if you like, is a life-wide and lifelong project. And it's a reflexive project that we accumulate music knowledge and experience as we go along. Some is discarded, some goes into the background. We then revisit that at later times in our life. And music becomes at varying stages more or less powerful. But we're building up a bank of experience, a bank of sound, a bank of emotions, a bank of meanings and values that assist us when we find ourselves in challenging places in life. Music is there as a resource to revisit, and as we think and revise on that whole identity project. I must say, working with Jason on this project, and the stories that were co-created with these young men, I think were so powerful in illustrating just those various things. We've heard tonight from Colton how music is very important at this stage of his life. He's now moving on into medicine, but music will always be there. So many of the young people who come through the university programs that I've been a director of over the last decade or so, for them, music is that resource that they move in and out of, and is incredibly important. Music is not just the career pathway or the amusement. It's actually a whole life enhancing experience.
Picking that up, Margaret, so what is the value of asking young people and parents' views of music education?
Well, they are the primary consumer. And so often education policy is sort of cooked up in back rooms with adults who've long since abandoned the experience of childhood and the wonderful playfulness of being in music. And I think engaging with young people's voices, which has been part of my entire research project from the very beginning, to ask and engage with young people, to understand their perspectives of the world. And I am still constantly surprised at how deep and knowledgeable their experiences of the world, and how much I and we can still learn from talking with young people and their parents and caregivers about the experience and practice of music.
Right. Jason.
I'm completely aligned with Margaret on this. And I guess for me, as a result of Margaret's inspiration, I have also been working quite substantially with young people and children on hearing what they have to say about music education and other issues. And I'm continually impressed and astounded in the work and the offerings and the perspectives they have to give us. We can learn so much. And I completely agree that curriculum and policies are often constructed by people who have long since been anywhere near children. So I think if we are going to make decisions about music education and the role of music in people's lives, those that it most affects should have a direct role in that. And I'm the person who goes to curriculum meetings and discussions about, oh, numbers are falling, or this is happening, or something else is happening. And I'm the person who says, has anyone asked the children or the young people what they think about this, why they're not doing something or why they are doing something else? And the answer is, oh, no, we won't do that. But again, I think we need to challenge that. If education is for children and young people, they should have a direct voice in the decisions that affect them. And it is aligned with the United Nations and the rights and the conventions of the right of the child.
Great. And on reflection now, what do you think is the research methodological contribution of this book and the research that underpins it?
I think the first thing, obviously, as we just mentioned, is seeking out student voice, and narrative inquiry is an easy and obvious choice to go towards when telling the stories and co-constructing stories with children and young people. Another big contribution, I would say, about methodology for this work is the draw and tell interviews with adolescents. A lot of work has been done in visual methods with young children, and Margaret is a leading global figure in that space. And again, through her inspiration of work that she's done, I then applied it to adolescents. I was probably unsure if teenage boys would actually have a lot to say about their music education. Teenage boys often get a bad rap in terms of grunts and moans that they might give. How was your day? And then, you get a, oh, it was fine answer, like a 2-second response. But I have to say, the draw and tell interviews completely exceeded my expectations. And if you go back and look at the transcripts on where the richest data occurred or where was generated, was from a draw and tell question, and then the transcript was just pages and pages of student reflection and perspectives. It was the most significant part of the interview and really, really rewarding. So I would highly recommend it as appropriate methodologies for young people.
Great. Margaret?
Well, I am fond of the draw and tell and for a range of reasons, because when people, I've used it a lot with young people, young children, where words may be difficult to generate or to get the flow going. It's a way of externalizing and focusing, and then the drawing itself becomes a prompt. So it's a way of eliciting thought and then providing a setup for further conversation and discussion. It can be a really powerful methodology. Other ways are perhaps using artifact elicitation, where I've asked young people and young children to bring an artifact that is personally significant to them to an interview. And that's a wonderful way of them beginning to say, why have you brought this? Well, it means this. I got it at this time. X gave it to me. And you can then move into some very subtle explorations of meaning and value through these artifact elicited or draw and tell methodologies.
Great. Margaret, so tell us from your educational perspective, what do you think that teachers might gain from this book?
Two things that might seem absolutely contradictory, as you would only expect from me, Graham. One is that young people have extraordinarily diverse tastes in music and interests in music, and bring those to the classrooms. So at one level, understanding that diversity and trying to embrace and work with that diversity as much as possible. And then the contradictory part of that is that none of us can teach everything. We can't teach every musical genre. So don't throw your hands up in horror and say, oh, I can't do that. Because the other corollary of that is, as young people have such diversity and complexity in their taste, they can be interested in anything. So your particular shtick might be one particular approach to music, but your way of engaging it can be the key to everything else. So use it in those two ways that operate, one, to look at singularity and then to look at diversity, not as oppositional, but as ways of opening each other up.
Right. Jason, from your perspective.
I think what Margaret has just described is exactly in line with what the participants themselves would say as well, the boys would say, because on the screen, Expanding My Horizons was a drawing by Blake, who literally said that classroom music was a way for him, yes, to share his own music, but really importantly, and this echoed across all of the boys, is it enabled them to see beyond what they could already. And they actually really valued that. They really valued learning about other perspectives, but starting from a common curriculum, so to speak, that allowed all of that everyone sort of learned similar ideas, but then was a springboard to them pursuing their own pathway. I think as well, a big contribution from this book is looking at all of the different uses of adolescent boys and how they use music. And it raises questions about none of those ways that they use music are really part of the curriculum. Are we teaching students as part of the curriculum to be connected through music? Are we helping them self-regulate with their Spotify playlist? Are we really including in the curriculum career education, and not just how to be a professional musician, but the ways that music can benefit all careers and all ways of living post-secondary school? So there are a number of things that I think there are curriculum implications for, and probably as well, I would say that teaching and learning framework is an opportunity to give teachers a template in which how they might start as a beginning teacher to frame their own personal philosophy of music education.
Great, good. Thank you for that. And in wearing one of your other hats now, Jason, you as the researcher. So on this research journey you've been on, what's next? What are the future questions that have been raised by this work for you that you and others need to follow up?
I think there are a number of issues that initially come to mind. Obviously, this is one particular context, and there's so many other places that we need to keep learning about. This is a senior secondary classroom music context at a boys' school. What about all of the other contexts that we have, not only in Australia in terms of public, Catholic and independent, but even different ages as well, and the various ways that people are using, young people and children are using music. Also, I think that we're in a different world now as well, or we're moving forward quite rapidly, aren't we, in terms of rapid social change. And the way that students are using music continues to evolve very quickly, particularly with generative AI. And that's really the next frontier in a way. How is that going to be part of our work and young people and children's lives going forward? Thirdly, as part of the broader discussion is our global priority around health and well-being and the relationship for identity construction and maintenance.
Great. Mm-hmm. And Margaret, from your perspective.
What next? Everything. In terms of work to be done, it's also looking at the places beyond school that I think is essential. We are learning a little about the lives of children and young people in schools, but learning more about the ways in which music is part of their lives out of schools, whether it be in family or in community, in friendship groups, in social settings, in cultural settings, and so on. And consider several things from those perspectives: how learning takes place in those, how musical interactions take place in those settings, how musical identities are formed, are molded, are supported in those settings. What are the life and learning outcomes from participation in music? We still tend to be so focused in music education on a singular output of preparing the professional musician. Whereas this work, and much of work that is occurring at the moment, is demonstrating far more diverse outcomes. Our challenge is to have policymakers, politicians, etc., understand that those more diverse outcomes are important, are worth supporting, and are part of the social and cultural fabric that we should be developing.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Graham, so much. And we could keep going, couldn't we? And I'm mindful that people may have questions as well they would like to raise. And just because of time, we probably won't be able to get to those, sorry. But what you could do is actually very happy for you to send them through to me, and I'm very happy to respond by email. And let's keep the discussion going. But just sort of drawing to a close now, I would like to conclude really with a big thank you, because this has been a monumental project and it could not have been done without the support and guidance of many. As I mentioned earlier, this book is based off my PhD, but sort of has taken a new life in a way. And I really should first and foremost thank my supervisors, Professor Margaret Barrett and Associate Professor Julie Ballantyne, where I completed my PhD at the University of Queensland School of Music. I also would like to pay tribute to my reviewers and examiners, Professor Graham Welch, Professor Scott Harrison, and Professor Patrick Freer. Importantly, the participants of this work and their families, who are now all adults and living different lives all across the country and the world even. Thank you so much for sharing and co-constructing your stories. You really are, I guess, the makers of this book in a way, and I've just sort of helped present it. And I'm deeply, deeply thankful for you sharing your stories and your drawings as well all those years ago so freely and so generously, and your loyalty over all these years. Thank you as well to all my past and current students, because you've all been helpful in ways of shaping my thinking as I'm writing this work. All my own music teachers in primary and secondary school and during my teacher education have been very significant in framing my thinking. Particular thanks to friends and colleagues and all of my family, but particularly my mum, dad, Aaron, and my partner James, for all of your encouragement, love, and support. So thank you everyone for being here this evening. It's so great to have so many people interested in research publications, and it's a real joy to have shared this with you. I hope you've enjoyed being part of it and hearing a little insight into the stories and drawings of these participants as much as I have. And please feel free to connect, as I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, farewell, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks so much, everybody.